Welcome everybody. Excited to have everybody here to talk about ideal customer profiles, hot topic. If anyone's going through 2023 planning, I'm sure this is definitely a conversation that's taking place across your organization. We're really excited, Mike and I, to dive into a lot of really good information about how he's helped, craft some pretty impactful ICPs during his career in go-to-market. So we'll probably get started in just a few minutes. I'll cover some housekeeping items, things like that, and we will get things going just shortly. For those of you that have dialed in, I would love to know where you're calling in from. I see a familiar face that just turned on his camera.
I just wanted to say hello. Thanks for having me.
How's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing well.
Great. Yeah, calling in from just outside of Boston, so over here on the East Coast.
Love that. I'm also calling in out of South Boston myself. How about you, Mike?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas.
Probably where it's much warmer than it is up here in New England, that's for sure.
No, it's like 34 degrees.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Staying corrected.
A few more degrees lower and our whole power grid will probably shut down.
Yeah, I think those are the best videos that I see. Yeah, I love those videos where like a few drops of rain takes place and all of a sudden it's mayhem. That was the case when I was living in Southern California as well, for some reason, but. Cool, we'll give it just about one more minute and then we'll get started. See another familiar face. Ben, how's it going?
Great. Welcome, everyone. Mike, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, looks like we can get started here. Going to share my screen for everybody. But I wanted to first just thank everybody for jumping on the call today. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, ideal customer profiles are definitely a hot topic, but in particular, they're such a hot topic at this time of year. Everyone right now is either going through 2023 planning. It could be just starting it. It could be right in the middle of it. You could be in the tail end of it. We know that we have about 1 month left in the calendar year and probably about 1 to 2 months left, depending on what your fiscal year is. Not a lot of time left, but there's always an opportunity to look at your ICP and figuring out, is this something that still stands as it is today, or is it something that we need to evolve? So I'm super excited to talk through this with Mike Smith, who is a go-to-market veteran, worked at some pretty reputable, fast growth, hyper growth companies over his tenure, and he has built some pretty world-class ICPs that have helped scale their business wherever he was. And super excited to have him join in today. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. Yes, this is being recorded. Yes, I will be sending out the recording afterwards to everybody that registered. So rest assured, you will get that in your inbox shortly after we conclude today. I would love for this to be interactive. Again, you don't feel the need to jump on camera. Don't feel the need to go off mute. I would love if you have any sort of questions or any sort of concerns, hopefully not, just to drop those into the chat. We're happy to kind of stop where we are and make sure that we can get your questions answered. We'll open it up to about like a 5 to 10 minute Q&A at the end. So if you want to save your questions to then, we can as well. But with that, I think we can get started. So today I am joined by, like I mentioned, Mike Smith. He is currently the VP of Growth and Go-to-Market at Teleport. Mike, you want to make an intro to yourself? I think you are on mute, Mike.
Oh, classic Zoom after years of this. Still on mute. Well, you can hear me now, right?
Correct.
All right, cool. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Mike Smith, VP of Growth and Go-to-Market at Teleport. Previous to that, as VP of Revenue Marketing at Launch Darkly. I've been in B2B SaaS since 2009. I'm a nerd for it. And yeah, I mean, the last 8 years or more of my career have been in the developer tools space. So yeah, it's a niche I really like. It's software is eating the world, and engineers and developers are the kingmakers. And I love bringing to market tools and platforms that help them be successful. And I've learned a thing or two about ICPs, not on purpose, through the last 6 years of my career.
That's awesome. And I'm Cody Bernard. I'm the head of marketing at Close Factor. My experience has been, all over the place, from early stage startups to later stage enterprise companies. I spent a few years at Dooley, previously to that, a few years at Drift, and then previously to Drift, time at LogMe and Bullhorn. So I've kind of seen, the full spectrum of, go-to-market models, ICP definitions, working in product marketing in particular over the last decade. So once this, topic came up and Mike and I started talking about it, him and I started to geek out a little bit, just given our experience, developing ICPs and trying to figure out like what works, what doesn't. So we're excited to kind of talk through some of those learnings that we've had over the course of our career, and we'd love to hear from you as well. But with that, I want to get into just, kind of a fun exercise of defining what is an ideal customer profile. So I literally just went to Google. I wanted to know like what's going to be the first thing that Google pops up. And it was an article from Crunchbase. There was other articles by, ABM, providers out there like Terminus and a bunch of companies that have done a really good job at trying to define what that is. But essentially the definition, the number one, one that people seem to trend towards is it's defined as a type of company that you would, that would get the most out of your product or service. They're the most likely that would buy or continue to use your product, making them, a really good lever for business growth. I think the topic that we're going to cover today is really relevant to this in particular. This is incredibly broad, right? Like there's a very broad definition as to what an ideal customer profile is. And we're going to get into, the nitty gritty about, how to do things right, areas that you should be staying away from, and best practices, that we've seen over the course of our 2 careers. But before getting into that in particular, I want to do a quick poll. So how do you define your ICP? I have a few options here. Feel free to drop, if you have anything that doesn't, fit the mold here. But you could be in one boat where you use a mix of firmographic and technographic data. You could be in another where you just target a few, best fit verticals like fintech or healthcare or staffing and recruiting. You could also just be in the boat where maybe you haven't achieved product market fit yet, or maybe you have, but you haven't necessarily defined what your ICP is yet. And then, another option as well, if you're in that boat. So I'm going to pop open the chat and try to see if I can get anything on my end. Mike, anything come through the chat?
No, I just typed a joke. I define ICP as insane clown posse. Womp, womp,
That is
womp.
true. That is
true. They are referred to as ICP.
That is a very good point. So yeah, we're going to go through and define it how we have kind of seen this work in our careers, and I think a different way than you might have been thinking about it previously. So with that, I'm going to kick us off with story time and pass things over to Mike.
Thanks, Cody. Thank you, Close Factors, for this opportunity. I'm super excited to talk about this topic, of which I have sort of stumbled into and learned that I really enjoy it. And like redefining what an ideal customer profile is versus tradition. And the story I want to open up with is I am on here today because of my career experience in bringing emerging technologies to market. I'm not like on my LinkedIn, I don't say I'm an ICP expert. I'm still learning every day. But the story I want to tell you is 6-7 years ago, I was at a company called Git Prime, GIT Prime. And at a very simple level, they were GitHub Analytics, so Git Analytics, Bitbucket Analytics, and they sort of gave you insights on code reviews, your development productivity, commits, etc. It's sort of like analytics for developers. And they were first to market and sort of created the category that now is developer productivity tools, developer insight tools. And now that's a pretty large market with folks, on enterprise to SMB sort of selling smaller solutions to much larger sort of platform plays. And I joined the company when they had reached product market fit to some extent, few $1 million in revenue, raised money, and just killing it in terms of where they're winning business. But as part of creating a category and just the nature of the developer productivity and analytics sort of wasn't necessarily celebrated, right? Because you're selling to engineers and developers and to technical people, and they're like, well, I don't need big brother data looking at all the things I'm doing all day long, but a CTO or VP of engineering valued that. And so when we looked at the data, and I came on board and like, how do we go to market? How do we double, triple, et cetera? And we look at everyone who purchased or all of the sales cycles. It was a very specific type of company. And it wasn't your typical like early adopters of technology, startups, et cetera. It actually wasn't East or West Coast. And the theory for that was essentially like places where engineers are heroes. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some of the smartest people, like engineers and developers, are in Silicon Valley. They did not want or need this thing. But operationally minded companies were the ones who were buying Git Prime. And the challenge for me was like, well, how do I figure that out? Like, how do I know company A and company B, which one's operational, which one's not? So we just looked at the data. We looked at dozens and dozens of traits and characteristics across sales cycle length and deal size and technology they used. And we defined it, and you'll see some examples of this, and we'll sort of pay this story off as we go through this. And we defined it. And then we said, okay, companies that have these 10 things, these are operationally minded, they're going to adopt Git Prime, and then over time we'll sort of pull in the East and West Coast. For example, like a beachhead was like Salt Lake City, which is like the Silicon Slopes. They were very operationally minded companies, and they just adopted the hell out of Git Prime, just to give you like a specific example. So we plugged that into the tools we had access to at the time, and that was like 1,300 accounts that fit those traits and characteristics. And we said, okay, I guess this is our ICP. Like at that point in time, I'm like, this is an ICP, but this is really how we make money for the next 12 to 18 months to 2 years, is we just need to go take down VPs of engineering and CTOs at these 1,300 accounts. And that's sort of how I fell into this. And that worked really, really successfully. In 1 year, we grew pipeline 300+%. And after about a year, we were acquired for 25x multiple by a publicly traded company. So yeah, to some extent, I wanted to keep doing it again. I was kind of bummed about the acquisition. But anyways, I took that mindset with me into other places I've been since. And it's just really interesting how different, unique, figuring out that story of where growth lies and who truly buys and who buys the most, the fastest. Is an interesting angle that can have a lot of impact and really like narrow your ideal customer profile strategy.
Yeah, I think we're going to get into the nitty gritty about that today in particular, which I'm really, really excited about. So I know why everyone's here. We obviously have the title of this live event as 5 reasons why your ICP is wrong. And it's a little provocative, but at the same time, there are certain things that companies do today when they define their ICP that is just not enough to foster growth, to open new markets or possibilities, or just to allow any sort of goal hitting from any of the revenue teams, whether you're sales or marketing or customer success even. So we're going to get into that, and we're going to start with our first reason as to why your ICP is wrong, and it's your ICP is defined too broadly. So what do we mean by that? I put a post up on LinkedIn recently after talking with a few colleagues in the space. And when I started to reach out to these people and ask them how they define their ICPs, I got back a relatively common answer. And it usually fell into the fact that they define their ICPs in three ways. One, they looked at company size. So, 0 to 1,000 employees could be bigger if you're serving enterprise, could be smaller if you're serving startups, SMB. What was included in your tech stack? So, a lot of companies integrate with Salesforce or Marketo or whatever tool that your company integrates really well with. You want to target companies that have that tech in their stack. And then lastly, industry, right? And it could be as broad as B2B SaaS, which is a very, very big market. And that was pretty much it. And it was really funny to me because when you actually run the numbers against an ICP like this, you're going to get brought back a list of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of accounts. And that is just way too broad of a market to go after. How do you know what to prioritize? How do you know what's a good fit for you now versus what's a good fit for you in the future? So when I started to talk to them a little bit about what they could be lacking, some of those other items that are really important, that what Mike was referring to, who are the buyer personas within those accounts, right? What are those roles that are always within those closed won opportunities? Because it will vary. The buying committee usually varies depending on the business you're going after. And you can start to see some trends when you look under the hood a little bit. Even further, the size of those teams. So if you're selling into, IT or developers, what are the size of those teams that tend to bring on software? Is it 5 engineers? Is it 25 engineers? Is there more to that number? And then you can look at other aspects too, like regions and locations or projects initiatives that they have. And there's a ton to go through. So I'm going to pass over to Mike to walk through an example of something that he's gone through when he's defined his ICP to take that broad approach and make it much more focused.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. To go back to my story, when I joined GitPrime, their ICP was anyone who uses GitHub and is willing to pay us money, right? Which is fair when you're getting adoption from early adopters. But that's a pretty big market. And the reality was there's efficiencies in certain types of companies that have GitHub and are willing to pay you money. Let's narrow that down and find the highest ROI and efficiency. So an example, going back to not having things go from broad, where you're going to have hundreds of thousands of accounts, you're going to be competing with everyone who's going after that market, and just really narrowing it down to who is the persona, right? And that's that first bullet, right? So this just general examples, like targeting people who are in software development or adjacent to. Look at that persona in terms of titles. Are they managers, directors, VPs, ICs, interns, right? I don't know. And what industries are they in? Tech, fintech, healthcare, insurance. Where are they located? This is really, really important. Not only just geo, but what cities? Because this could actually help define marketing plays. This could help you do better territory planning. I always say that sales talent should be balanced with demand and territory, right? And if the reality is of your business, everything is West Coast, then you need to properly align for that and plan and strategize for that. And then just size of company in terms of employees, everyone is going after 100 to 10,000 employee companies, right? But do you sell to all employees, or do you sell a product to the engineering team, the marketing team, HR, finance? What is the size of those teams? That is a better indicator of a better, more aligned, efficient ICP. And then just revenue, what is the revenue of these companies? I think you have to be realistic based on the stage of your business. We all aspire to go after the enterprise and billion-dollar businesses, but there's probably a sweet spot that is analogous between size of employees and size of revenue. That really is where you're winning. And then technographics, right? What technologies are they using? And really, really getting into that. And this, without being too promotional, is where Close Factors in my career has provided a ton of value, and how they help me pull that data as well as compare it against the population of all other accounts and looking for those outliers.
Yeah, and I think this is like the level of detail is not necessary for every single company, but it should be, some aspects that you need to be looking into, right? Like going back and looking through all of that data, which we'll talk about later on within this conversation, but really understanding, what does your world look like, and then understanding, well, what is the world that you should be going after is incredibly important, because you don't want reps wasting time, you don't want marketing wasting dollars on, accounts that aren't necessarily a good fit. So this is a way that you can go down to really narrow the scope to make sure that they're going after the right people at the right accounts.
So I want to give you a tip, and we'll get more into this later. But I think when you're doing an ICP exercise, you want to ask yourself a very simple question: who buys the most, the fastest? Because money now matters more so in this macroeconomic environment. Money now matters always. And I think sometimes we get bright-eyed with the $1 million deal that's going to take 7 years to close. And somewhere in your data, you need to ask the question, who buys the most, the fastest?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're going to jump into our second reason. And this one's actually really interesting because I'm sure it's going to ruffle a little feathers or ruffle some feathers with people. Your ICP lacks ownership. Now, it's really funny because if you ask who owns building, the ICP, you're going to get a bunch of different answers. You're going to get product marketing, you're going to get sales, you're going to get the board or the C-suite. It's just really interesting because at the end of the day, it's everybody's job, right? Like you need to be able to make sure that you're collecting all of this type of information across all functions within your organization so that you have the best picture, the most clear picture as to who your ICP really is. Now, please disregard the stock photo that I used in this. I just thought it was funny. But here's just like a few quotes, right? Like you have people in sales or the VP of sales coming out saying, our ICP is the enterprise. And then you have your board member saying, well, our ICP is fintech. And then across the board, you have other people saying our ICP is startups or our ICP is anyone that uses the campaign object in Salesforce. Shout out to our product people. All the way over to the account executive who says, well, our ICP is insurance companies because I actually closed 3 deals in the insurance industry last month. So how do you know where to spend your time? How do you know who to listen to? Mike, what's your advice on that?
Cody, I feel so seen. My favorite is the VP of product. Our ICP is people use the campaign object in Salesforce. Like it's just each one of these is like someone's opinion and like recency bias and their sort of aspiration as well, right? So many startups, they raise money and then they're like, our ICP is enterprise. Hire a bunch of salespeople, go up market, and like that's just not where you might be on the trajectory of your company as well as like the market adoption. And then you have, founders, God bless them, I love them so much. There's probably a few on this call who just really like are attached to the small business, right? They like PLG and their ICP is small and transactional and low touch sales and sort of get stuck in that mindset. Yeah, so I think the clear point here is a lot of companies, ICP is almost based on the most powerful person's opinion and it lacks ownership. And you should figure out who owns it, and you need to ask the right questions, which is like, what does the data say? Of all of our closed won accounts and closed lost accounts, what do they have in common? What's the difference? And not be pressured by the opinions of other folks in other departments.
So in your experience, who owns ICP development?
Well, me, marketing, but more specifically, I mean, if I'm to give you an honest answer, in my experience, it's been me, because this is sort of like and I sit in demand gen, revenue marketing, whatever you want to call it, go to market. But to be honest, I think product marketing should take a larger ownership in helping define the ICP. But the reality is, and these things don't exist, they sort of exist, but it's not formalized in businesses yet, which is like go-to-market teams. Like we have a go-to-market team at other places I've been, but that's like a bi-weekly call about pipeline or something. We don't necessarily have like a cross-functional named go-to-market team that then works on these things. So the challenge, I just want to point out some alignment issues, is RevOps sort of defines like territory planning, quota setting, sales things. And then marketing comes in and swoops in and says, here's our ICP. Let's go operationalize this across everything we're doing with all the things you're planning. And then product marketing and sales have like a lot of opinions on both those things, like what the ICP says, how it defines personas, and then like, who are these accounts? And it's challenging for someone in marketing who's just running that. And so it needs to be a shared responsibility. I'd encourage everyone to like look at product marketing, look at RevOps, and then sort of align around a go-to-market team in a very intentional way. It was kind of a long answer to your question without a specific answer, but I think it's RevOps, marketing, and sales.
Yeah, I think in my experience, the way I've seen ICPs defined the best is when product marketing is the tip of the spear. Like they are driving the project to define the ICP, just given the cross-functional nature of the department working across sales, marketing, customer success, product. They have a really good, pulse on the market, your customer base, or they should in theory, right? So I would look to that individual or those individuals as the person that would, kick off the project if you're looking to define or evolve your ICP. But like Mike mentioned, you need to involve everybody, from RevOps to, sales, obviously, even customer success, product. I mean, it needs to be such a cross-functional effort. But yeah, I think in my experience, product marketing has been kind of the driver behind that. So let's move on to the next one. Reason number 3, why your ICP is wrong, which is your ICP reinforces markets that you're already in. This one's a really interesting one. The way that you can think about it is basically you're putting a ceiling on your ICP. And that's always something that is good in the short term because it lets you kind of ruthlessly prioritize. But at the end of the day, what it does is it doesn't help you foster evolution of your ICP. So I've been at a few early stage companies now over the last 5 years, specifically in MarTech and sales tech. And one thing I think I've seen that's been, a commonality across the board is that we will define our ICP, we'll go and we'll to the all company meeting and everybody will rally around. Yeah, we're going after these accounts. Like we have a huge TAM that we're going to be going after. We're going to make billions and billions of dollars. And that's great. And that's, really good for about 6 to 12 months, even potentially less time. But there was really no, evolution of that ICP as you start to expand your product line, as you start to expand use cases that your product can support, whether it's within one function or expanding to multiple functions, whether you're verticalizing your product or your go-to-market strategy, whether you're looking at international expansion, your ICP needs to evolve with those changes in strategy. And a lot of the time they don't. A lot of the time that you think one thing that you've set in stone that might have worked for you when you were a Series A or Series B company growing at, double or triple every single year, that's not going to help you get from, 25 to 50 million or 25 to 100 million or whatever your growth targets are going to be. You need to think differently. And that's something that's very, very important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think the problem is people take a snapshot and then they go to market against that snapshot. And they're just constantly reinforcing until you just tap that market out. So many software companies are guilty of this. And you're probably, you could probably think of some off the top of your head, like, oh, whatever happened to them? They probably just thought their market was small businesses. They took a snapshot of their ICP. It had recency bias, and they just keep going to market against the same accounts. When the reality is, if you look in the data, there may actually be higher value dollar, like entrance in mid-market and enterprise, or like insurance verticals. And that's the stuff you need to pay attention to so that it evolves properly.
Yeah, I think you and I, before we jumped on the call, we're talking about a pretty fun example. You want to kind of let the people in on what you were.
I'll try to keep this short. More stories. So I'm sure you're familiar with the assault bike. They're pretty brutal. The assault bike, or the concept of the assault bike, what used to be called Aerodyne bike, has been around since 1978. And very few of them set in gyms for 20 years. one or two, and they marketed and sold to gyms as cardio. The reality is that the value of an assault bike or Aerodyne bike is getting your heart rate up in a really short amount of time. That's why it's so brutal. And with the emergence and popularity of CrossFit and high intensity interval training and those things, the assault bike and Aerodyne bikes just sort of took off. But they thought their market was cardio. They thought their market were gyms. And timing is everything here. And this is also a story about ICP and product market fit. But the story of assault bike is they randomly presented at a CrossFit expo, and their business took off from there. And now if you go to any CrossFit gym or HIIT gym, there's like dozens of assault Aerodyne bikes, right? And that is their ICP, because that is their product market fit. And that's where they provide the most value. But these things set in gyms for 20 years. And if they didn't find where their fit was, they probably think their ICP is like gyms buy, a few $100,000 a year of this thing, and it's used for cardio, but that wasn't the reality.
Yeah, it's funny. If you go back even like 15, 20 years, at least for me personally, going to my local YMCA, the assault bike was always just in the corner, dust on it. No one ever really used it. No one really knew what it was for. So I think it was probably a multitude of problems. Positioning probably, one of those problems. But yeah, I mean, that's always interesting, right? Because why cap yourself? Like, why limit yourself to what is possible? You also need to be able to look at what's possible now versus what's possible in the future, right? Like, that's also something that's very important. You can't bite off more than you can chew. But at the same time, you should always be looking for those growth levers or those, changes or evolution in your market that you're going after. And yes, that goes for the assault bike, but it also goes for, software. That's something that's always changing. Obviously, we've seen a ton of different, changes over the last 10 years, specifically to B2B SaaS. I mean, now with everybody talking about PLG and, a multitude of different products coming out to support that go-to-market motion, you just need to always be looking at your market and having a pulse on what's going on. We do have our first question, which I'm very excited about. Hank.
Cody and Mike, thank you. One question I have is, when you think about iterating on this, what is the frequency that you're looking at in order to get enough data to be able to support it? And like from your historically looking at it and where you've seen success, because I think that's where a lot of times I might get hung up in like what's too much or too little. And I would love to get your perspective on that.
Frequency, like as in measuring this, looking at this as a sort of ever evolving, moving thing.
Exactly.
Oh, I mean, at a minimum once a year, I would say every quarter if you can do it. If you're a fast growing company, and we'll get into this later, those outliers and identifying those early and often are huge in terms of your strategic advantage and your go-to-market strategy. So yeah, at a minimum once a year, twice a year is sort of what I operate at, just because that's my resources. But yeah, if you can do it quarterly, or if you can have a tool or a thing, which we're getting to that place working with Close Factors, where you just drop in your opportunities, spits out the various charts and data of your ICP, and you just run it whenever the hell you want. That's the dream.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, I think from a product marketer's perspective, just pulling from my career in that particular function, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about on the previous reason, which is kind of the lack of ownership piece and product marketing being the spearhead there. I would look at it as if, from a product marketing standpoint, we would look at positioning every quarter. And that was something because we wanted to make sure that we always kept a pulse on the market, our buyers, our customers, what was going on. So I think if you already have product marketing as the owner of, ICP definition, this kind of fits into that wheelhouse around refreshing positioning every quarter. And that's something I think is pretty standard across product marketing teams. But again, we always get lost in the grind and, it might not happen every single quarter. So I would say, yeah, I would, with Mike, at least once or twice a year. But if you can do it, or you have a product marketing team in place, I'd be looking at that every quarter when you're looking at refreshing your positioning as well.
Yeah, I mean, how often does sales do close loss, close one analysis? like every quarter usually. I think you pair that with an ICP update and you actually see if there's correlation there. What is the ICP of closed loss? What is the ICP of closed won? I think eventually we're all going to get to that point.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Hank. Appreciate that.
No, thank you guys.
So we're going to jump into reason number 4. So your ICP lacks balance between qualitative and quantitative data. Mike, I'm going to pass this over to you.
Cool. So these are just, you don't need to understand these charts. They're there for sort of visual aid. But a lot of what people do with ICP, you saw it lacks ownership, and you saw the various folks in various departments giving their like strong but loosely held opinion. Strongly held but loosely data-driven opinion on like the ICP is enterprise, the ICP is startups, the ICP is insurance, because I closed some deals recently in insurance. So what you need to do when you're building this is, one, you need to look at the data, like a data-driven ICP, it needs to be qualitative. You need to be looking at the right things, close won and close loss, late stage deals, and just sort of define what your sample size is, your data set. And then these are just some examples, right? Like in terms of like sales cycle length and deal size, the industry in this chart is software and services. But like you can't ignore healthcare because it's almost 40% more in ARR at almost the same, if not a shorter sales cycle. So like that's an interesting qualitative data point. And then this other one is technology usage versus the general population. And this is a unique data point that Close Factors provides and is fantastic. Next slide. What you can't forget, and I actually learned this, going back to my story, I just was like data driven, and then you push this to sales and they're like, whoa, this doesn't make sense. These accounts, this thing, I have opinions. I'm the person selling this thing. I'm a BDR, SDR, I'm on the phones. Like, your data's great. There's some bias there. Your observations make sense, but let me add additional narrative to what you're trying to say. And I think it's important you do that by balancing qualitative, which we just got into, and quantitative, which is send a sales survey to your entire sales team, maybe even survey customers, throw that into a word cloud, see what comes back, right? Get the opinion in like a measurable way. This is sort of quantitative as well. Oh, actually, these words should be swapped. Anyways, qualitative and quantitative. Look at the data of what's closing, and then get the opinion of sales, get the opinion of products, survey your customers. And this screenshot on the right, look at gong recordings or chorus recordings, right? So if you look at this, 70% of closed won calls contain the word Azure. What does that mean? That's kind of a data-driven thing, but like you're not looking at like a certain thing within your Salesforce data. This is like, what are they saying in sales on calls? And I think that's another interesting data point to look at as you balance qualitative and quantitative. So TLDR, look at all your opportunities, figure out late stage, close won, whatever, what's important there, measure a bunch of things across that. That spits out traits and characteristics of like ICP fit accounts. And then what you want to do is sort of get the sentiment or get additional data points from sales in terms of like what they think, what they have to say through sales surveys, looking at gong call information, putting that in word clouds and whatever else that says. It's part validation, but part, I think you'll actually be able to even refine the ICP even further.
Yeah, a brief comment is, I think one of the things that we've introduced that's helped into our ICP is looking at regulation changes, like if you're in healthcare. And so a lot of the qualitative inputs tend to be internal. We're focusing more on external qualitative inputs, like regulation changes, market trends, stuff we get from Gartner, Forrester, that kind of stuff. And it has been a better validation point or invalidation point than our internal speak.
That's a fantastic point. Yeah, right, because there's bias confirmation bias by surveying sales or looking at other things in your qualitative data. I love that. Look externally at the market and look at analyst reports and those things. Noted.
Well, and we all know what we're saying to each other around the water cooler anyway, which, maybe showing my age with that statement, but, the real stuff that we need to introduce to the conversation is what are the independent analysts saying? What are the regulators saying? Because they're going to give you a much broader indicator, because we tend to be a little bit insular when we look at ICP, and the hard thing to break out of is that insular, bias to get much more externally focused.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to say I missed the water cooler talk, to be honest. That is just me personally. But no, I agree with that. And I think one thing I did want to add, though, which might be contrary to popular belief, is I tend to go into it with assumptions about who I think our ICP is, or what data points I think exist or would, be in the favor of my assumption, because I want to be proved wrong, right? Like there are things that I think that I know, but I would rather be proved wrong so that you can continue to evolve your ICP over time. But because you don't know what you don't know, and if you go into it without any level of assumption about what that could be or what a data point could be, you might not have anything to benchmark it against.
This is a really great point. This has actually sort of been the case in my experience, right? So if we go back to that slide where people have their various opinions, and VP of sales or your recent VC is like, your ICP is enterprise, and it's our job as go-to-market teams and our responsibility to say, well, let me look at the data. And there have been a lot of times where you just validate that opinion. But I'm so glad we did that, right? Because what if you were wrong? You are spending millions of dollars, resources, people, time, your company's life and death, if you will, not to be dramatic, going to market against that. So you have to look at the data, but it's actually okay from just your ego or experience that someone will just say, I told you so. But I sleep good at night that I triple, double, quadruple checked it.
Yeah, this goes back to not having.
The other thing is when someone says enterprise, the whole purpose of
I think you're cutting out on us, Ben.
sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. So the whole idea of ICP is operationalized, so you have efficient marketing to focus on the most likely people to buy and buy the most. So it's too amorphous a definition. The definitions that you guys are talking about, which are much more specific, are things that you can then operationalize into campaign activity, into target marketing, into ABM.
Yep. Yeah, I think I like where he was going with that. I think he actually dropped off through connection issues, but I'm sure Ben will hop back on. Let's keep moving on to our last point. I want to make sure we're being cognizant of people's time here. So the last reason, your ICP isn't aligned to your go-to-market. Ben, Mike, I'm going to pass things back over to you here to talk about some key questions that you need to be asking yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. For the person who dropped off, you can just put your point or question in chat. Happy to address it. Yeah, so what I found in my experience is, and what I hear from my peers, is the ICP sort of is this product marketing driven or other team driven, right? As you hear us talking, you probably hear of these various reasons and points we've been making, keep coming up, right? So lack of ownership or whatever, who's driving it. It's an exercise that is a checkbox at the beginning of the year, and it's not integrated. And to the point the person earlier was making is into campaigns, into ABM, into your go-to-market. It's just this interesting artifact that sits on a wiki, and it's oh, this is our ICP. But the question is ICP, now what? right? And the questions you should be asking is, if we've done this properly, if we're all confident in this and we believe in this, and like we've done a data-driven approach to it, like how can we measure ICP fit, like on a scale? What makes an account strong ICP fit versus another account? And like, how do I make that a point of measure in our tools and systems? How do ICP fit accounts differ by like sales segment, SMB, mid-market, enterprise, EMEA, APAC, North America? Like you could look at it as a whole, or you could also look at it by those various segments. And if every account was put on a scale in terms of ICP fit, how does that change your go-to-market? Like if I told you your ICP is 5,000 accounts globally, and if we put this on a scale in terms of fit, these 100 are the best fit. What do you do differently? I don't know. I'd get a plane ticket and knock on their doors and sing them Christmas carols this time of year. Like if these accounts are that strong of a fit and mean that much to me, that's what I would do. And then like, what is the TAM, right? TAM, I just think is so meaningless now in terms of its much broader sense. Like that's how you go raise money. Like we have a product for software developers. There's 22 million software developers in the world. By 2025, there'll be 1 billion, whatever. But like, what is the TAM of your ICP? And what is the TAM of accounts that are stronger fit across that scale to less fit? And that really just like, to me, I think of budgeting implications. I think of how we design our teams. I think of sales territory planning. I think of just like really key, crucial go-to-market decisions, just like ladder back up into this. And not a lot of companies, ICP is like a thing on the wiki and they check the box for the year, but it really should like determine a ton of your go-to-market roadmap.
Yeah, it's the slide that always is shown during sales kickoff every single year that people get excited about and then is never revisited again. So you have your new ICP going through, you know, some of these steps, figuring out where there are inefficiencies, where things are wrong, and maybe you made some adjustments. So what do you do now? But before we actually get into that point, Mike wanted to highlight a bonus tip for everybody, which is how to find your ICP's sweet spot. And this goes back to the earlier question that we had that Mike was kind of posing to everybody. Who spends the most, the fastest?
Yes. Who spends the most, the fastest? Time and money are what matter, right? I've always struggled in my career with the aspirations of the $1 million deal and the whale chasing sort of culture. Maybe that's a personal problem. I should do the self-work to figure out that. And maybe I'm just like overly pragmatic. But it's with a growth mindset. The question I found I asked at Get Prime, and then I asked at Launch Darkly, and now I'm asking at Teleport is what accounts have short sales cycles and meaningful ARR in terms of opportunity size? Close one or late stage? I like to look at late stage because it just gets you a larger data set and you take out for like the variability of like, you know, if it went sour in procurement or if like the AE is terrible at selling. So if you look at late stage opportunities, what is the sales cycle length? What is this average deal size? And you throw that into bubble charts and you ask the question, who spends the most, the fastest? This is my tip. Look for the outliers, look up, right? You want to look up because that means deal size is high and you want to see if sales cycle is like ridiculous or within some sort of range. And when you put data into this format, don't be blind by, I'm going to give an example by the revenue range of this example, 1 million to 10 million or 10 million to 100 million. Those are big bubbles, but like there's a lot of like historical, that's what got your company to where it's at. But I'm actually willing to wait I don't know, I think I blurred this out, but 30 more days for a revenue range company that's 5 billion. It's a smaller bubble, but that's almost twice, if not 3 times the size ARR. And there's like a bunch of bubbles sort of in that group. And so what that tells me is who buys the most, the fastest. When you look at this chart, it's the gray bubble, like no doubt. But there's outliers here that you can plan your strategy around, which is like somewhere around like 500 million to 5 billion. This weird outlier, 500 to 1 billion. But like that little sweet spot, the deal size is almost double or triple, and the sales cycle length is like 30, 45 more days. Like all day long, let's go after that market. And what we've already captured, like if you look at the big bubbles, you've already captured like the 1 to 100 million market. Just find a way to keep that going. But in terms of investment strategy, where you're leaning in, how you're growing the business, and those decisions, who buys the most, the fastest, throw it into bubble charts and look up. The other example is like just, I think this is powerful because you have your own tech, right? So this example is like if you have SDKs, right, which are code snippets you install into your code to make the thing that you have work. And what of your product usage indicates who buys the most, the fastest. And obviously here it's not Zarman, or I don't know if I'm saying that right, or Ruby or Python. Those are huge programming languages and markets, but it's the OGs like .NET and Java. And then more interestingly, Go, which is a fairly new programming language. So what about Go? Is it because Go is adopted at larger enterprises to do more like new microservices projects? What is it about React? Anyways, I think I've made my point, but when you look at your data, throw it into bubble charts across time and money and figure out who buys the most, the fastest. Next slide.
I love that. So we talked about a lot. We've been rambling on now for about 45 minutes. We have 8 minutes left in the meeting. I want to make sure that we can answer any questions that come through. So I wanted to open it up. So either feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat, or just raise your hand and we can start to take questions that way. If you don't have any questions and you want to hop off, feel free to do that as well. But before you do that, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us today for this conversation about how you can develop better ICPs that are going to help fuel your go-to-market strategy and help you hit your goals over the next year. It's going to be a really weird year for everybody in 2023. So I think this is something that could make a really huge impact on your organization if you can get this right. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Again, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. If not, feel free to drop off. And thank you again for joining. I also can't see the chat for some reason. So Mike, if you see anything come through, feel free to let me know.
Cody and Mike, thank you.
Appreciate you, Hank.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. Sorry for my connection problems. I'll just say this, guys. This is one of the better sessions I've attended all year. And what you guys said is super critical because ICP is going to be so important because the people who are going to be purchasing stuff this year, making capital investments, are those who are going to show an ROI from the product they buy. And you got to get really down to a fine point for that because we're all going to remove some products and not buy as much as we did in the past years. Tuned ICP is going to help us identify the people who get the most ROI out of our products. So this is really thank you.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ben. That's a fantastic point. Buyer behavior, the macroeconomic environment is changing who buys. Not everyone's buying software all the time, every day, multiple year deals anymore. They're consolidating 1-year deals. Just the behavior's changed. And who's not changing their behavior, right? And like, where does that show up in your data? So yeah, fantastic point. It is now more important than ever to sort of figure out who buys the most, the fastest, and who's not changing their behavior. Well,
I think, we do have questions in the chat. Awesome. The they're also being answered as we go, but I do want to just highlight one before we jump off. What are your thoughts on churned accounts and how they impact ICP? Mike?
I love the question. I think there's something interesting there. I think you want to look at late stage close lost. Well, you want to look at close lost and then churned, like they were a customer, they no longer use the product. Yeah, honestly, in my experience, like if I just go back to Get Prime again, back to my story, I'm gonna keep leaning on this one. Churned accounts were, because this was a emerging new category, developer productivity, were like hot, cool startups. Like, how dare we give them data and measure the commits they're doing all day? They're super cool and they have brilliant engineers. And it was controversial a bit at the time. Now it's more of a normalized category. But yeah, churned accounts were companies in the Bay Area. And we figured out the market for Get Prime was like operationally minded companies. But how do you turn that into an ICP? And through asking the question, who buys the most the fastest, we figured it out. But I think I think that should be part of it. And it's definitely something we didn't cover here. So great point. There's another question from Lena. How do you determine which criteria should be stronger for the ICP? I'm not sure I understand the question. Lena, do you want to add some color?
I think the way I interpret it is like, how do you determine which characteristics of your ICP are the most important things to be looking for? Like, yeah, which of the indicators should be weighed more versus less?
Yeah, I think deal size, sales cycle length, that data point versus like the general population, churn or lack thereof, size of the thing, right? Like if you remember the chart earlier, I called out Go language. That's not a huge market. So I think what the point that's kind of coming to my mind here is, if you take all of this literally, your ICP could be like 5 companies if they need to meet all of that criteria. And it's just really this like giant if then statement, and then figuring out what that is on a scale in terms of fit, right? Like you could interpret like, oh, healthcare companies are really valuable that use Go language. That's not a market, right? So you have to be a little bit more realistic in terms of like the TAM and the flexibility between meeting all that criteria.
I also think that's where like account segmentation and scoring comes into play. Because to your point, if you know, your A accounts might be a list of about 5, 20, maybe 100 at most, depending on how you're defining your ICP. And, you know, your pool of accounts might be much larger in that B2C range, but just kind of understanding the characteristics of what makes those different levels of scoring unique is very, very important, because that's going to inform your marketing programs, your sales plays, how much time or money that you're investing in certain areas. So all things to keep in mind as you're figuring out what does our account list look like? How are we going to break that down and be able to support and break into those accounts?
Cody, I know we have 1 minute. I just want to say a couple of things before we end. To everyone who's still on, thank you so much for attending. Seriously, this was fun. I would love to do more of this. You can find me on LinkedIn, Mike Smith. Just make sure it's the Mike Smith that works at Teleport. You can message me there, but I just want to say thank you to Close Factors. I just love working with this company. I think they're on to a really, really exciting opportunity. The way they're thinking, the way they're building product, the way like they're engaging with customers and enabling me to go to market in a better way. So thank you for this opportunity, Cody. Thank you to everyone attending. Thank you, Close Factors. I love you so much. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. We appreciate you and your wisdom as well, Mike. Thank you everybody for joining. We're going to sign off for today. The recording will be sent out shortly, so be on the lookout for that. But thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day.